Hello and welcome, and today we're going to be talking about macro photography. So macro really is a misleading word in photography, because to some people it means one thing and to other people it means something much more pure. To the majority it just means a close-up shot, and that's fine. It does determine that type of photography, so it's getting up close to your subject. And there's lots of different ways of doing that, and different cameras you can use and different equipment. So let's say I'm taking pictures of butterflies. I would probably use a telephoto lens because it's quite hard to get close to the butterfly. In a lot of cases I do use a normal macro lens as well, but this will allow you to photograph things like butterflies, and especially dragonflies I use it for, and things like that. So things that you struggle to get close with. Now a lot of these state that they're actually macro. I don't think this one does, but this is a Canon 100-400 Mark II lens, and it's great for that type of photography. The nice thing about it is, unlike most lenses of this size, you can focus from a distance of 3 foot away, and that's the important thing. It's no good having a big powerful lens if it shoots 12-13 foot away, because you're not going to get close to the subject. However, there is a way around that, and we'll talk about that later on. So this is a lens that you could use to get close, but it's not a macro lens. And when I talk about a macro lens, I'm meaning a one-to-one image. So basically the real size of the image. So if I took a photograph of a penny, say, or a 2p piece, that would actually be the same size on the sensor as the photograph that you're producing. So when we're talking about close-up photography, in the true sense, macro, we're talking of macro lenses. And there are various ways to shoot macro. A true macro lens, this is the 100mm Canon macro lens. And this is a really nice lens, but it's very expensive. It's around £800. £800 to £900 for that lens. So it's not a cheap way starting. These are usually for the people who do a lot of macro photography and want the very best equipment. However, that said, you can also get very good macro shots with cheap equipment, so don't be fooled into that. I use this a lot, and it is useful. 100mm is a nice size. It does allow you to get close, reasonably close, to things like butterflies and that, without being straight on top of them, and bees and wasps and that type of thing, without having to sort of breathe down the noses. If you use a shorter lens, say a 60mm or a 50mm macro lens, then you do have to get a lot closer. So a lot of people use those for flowers and things like that, but to get really close to your subject, they can be a nice alternative to something like this. You know, because it's cheaper, you get a little bit more depth of field with a shorter lens than you do with a longer lens, and that's really important in macro photography, because you get a very shallow depth of field. And the longer the lens, so when I'm talking of taking a macro shot, well, not a macro shot, but a close-up shot with a 400mm lens, I'm going to get a very shallow depth of field, and I'm going to have to push the f-stop up or close up the aperture to get a sharp shot. And that's not always the best thing for a big zoom lens. They don't perform at the best when you're doing that. So the shorter the lens, sometimes, if you want to get really close, can be a good thing, but I wouldn't go below 50mm. 50mm, 60mm is about the size if you want to get really close to things. The 100 can still get you close, and we'll be looking at that. Obviously this is a macro lens, so it shoots 1-to-1. However, the important thing to remember is it only shoots 1-to-1 at the closest focal point. So that means when you focus is all the way to as close as you can actually get. That is when you're getting 1:1. Any other distance you are away from the subject, you're not getting true macro, although it's still going to be close up, it's not a true macro shot. So that's important to remember as well. Okay, so that's the expensive one. Now, this one is also not a cheap lens. It's cheaper than the one I've just shown you, but this is a very special lens. This is a lens by a company called Laowa. It's a Japanese company, and they produce quite old-fashioned type lenses, and by that what I mean is the aperture and everything on this, there's no manual settings on this. It's manual focus, manual aperture, and the aperture is actually, I don't know whether you'll be able to see, but there's a ring on there, and that has got where you set the aperture. So you actually turn the ring to set the aperture. You don't use a camera. It's got no electrical contact at all with the camera. So everything is done manually. But what's great about this lens is it shoots 2:1. So at this closest focal point, it will get you twice as close as the 100 macro lens that I've just shown you. So it's 2:1, whereas the other lens is 1:1. And there are other lenses, specialist lenses. There's a Canon one that will actually shoot 5:1. But I like this. I can actually get 5:1 with this by using extension tubes with it. It's a nice little toy. It is very, very sharp. It's got a nice sharpness to it. It falls off a little bit on the outside, but that's not too bad with the macro lens. It's when you're getting close up, it's not that much of a problem. But it is really, really sharp, and it's a cheap option if you want to get really close. But it's very, very hard to use. There's no automatic focus. In a lot of macro photography, you're not using automatic focus anyway. Manual focus is usually the way to go. Having said that, I manage quite well with my camera. It depends on your camera. It does shoot well in auto mode, and that's nice because I can shoot one-handed and do other things with the other hand, like holding lights and things. That's useful if you can use the autofocus at times. Okay, so that's a more specialist lens for getting extreme macro photography, and there's also different ways of doing that without one of these lenses. So again, you haven't got to spend the money on one of those. My cheapest setup is using lenses in conjunction with an extension lens, or an extension tube rather. An extension tube is just that. It's a tube. It's a hollow tube, no glassing. So you can see I'll put my finger in there. There's no glass whatsoever. It's just a hollow tube. Now there's two different types. Some have got an electrical contact on there, which these have, which allow you to use the autofocus still on your camera and to set the aperture. And there's also a type without those on, which are cheaper. So you have to focus manually. But more importantly, you can't change the aperture by using your camera either. So you lose that contact as well. That can cause a problem because when you take your lens off the camera, when you turn the camera off, the lens will automatically open up to its widest aperture. It does that when the camera's at rest, the aperture opens when you take the lens off. And if that happens, and then you put it on your extension tube, you have no depth of field, it's going to be really wide open, you're going to get very soft focus. There is a way around that if you use those types of tubes, and that is to actually have the camera on, set it on manual, set the aperture that you want, say f11 or f13, something like that, and without turning the camera off, take off the lens. That will then fix the aperture at that size. So then you turn the camera off, you put your extension tube on, put your lens on, and that aperture will remain actually on the lens. So that's a way by, but some people actually don't like that. They say it could damage the camera. I've never known that, but I don't want to go down that route anyway. I'm going to use the electrical contacts, and these come in all sorts of prices. You can get a kit of 3 different sizes. Usually they're about 18, 20 and 30 to 35 millimeter in size. And what they actually do is they push the lens further away from the sensor of the camera, and by doing that it allows you to focus closer to your subject. So if you've got a lens that shoots 3 foot away, this will enable you to shoot just a few inches away by using different sized extension tubes. So it's a really cheaper way to get into macro photography, and they are good. I even use these with macro lens to get me even closer, so I can get past that 1:1 focal length and get really close to subjects. And we'll be talking about these in the first instance of showing you a little bit about macro, so the cheapest alternative. Prices of these, as I was going to mention, you can get them as cheap as £28 for the focus type. I've not used those, but I have seen those. If you look on Amazon, a place like Amazon, and look at the reviews and read the reviews, you will see that those around that price get quite good reviews. So you have to get the right ones for your camera, obviously, because they've all got different mounts. So these are Canon ones. The ones that I use are Kenko, and they cost about £100, I think, for a set of 3. Now, I like them, they work really well. I haven't used the cheaper ones, but from what a lot of people say, they're just as good. So, you know, it's for you to find out on that score. But they are supposed to be good, so around £28, £30 will get you a set of these tubes. Okay, so they take the lens further away from the camera. So what are the best lenses to use with these? Well, I would recommend something like a 50mm prime or a 60mm prime 65. That's probably the best size to use. But I use them also with my 100mm lens, so, you know, the macro lens. Sky's the limit. And you can also use them. A lot of people don't realise this, but my 400mm telephoto lens, if you focus 9 foot away like some of them do, you couldn't get any closer, you can put this on your 400mm lens and it will allow you to shoot close up and to get macro shots with a 400mm. The downside is of these extension tubes is when you put them on the lens can only shoot a short distance. In other words, you haven't got infinity on the focal length. You've only got a short distance. That could be, depending on what length of these extension tube you've got on your camera, that could be anything from a few inches to 4 or 5 foot, maybe, in some cases, depending on the length of the lens. But after that, everything's a blur. You can't focus on anything. But if you're just doing macro photography, that doesn't really matter, because that's what you're putting them on for, to get up close. And if you take them off, you've still got your full range of usage. My 100mm specific macro lens by Canon is nice for me because I can use it without having to take extension tubes off and get fairly close. I can put extension tubes on if I want to get even closer, and if I haven't got the extension tube on, I can get closer or I can get to infinity. So it's nice if you want to take other shots while you're doing your macro work. And it does make a nice portrait lens at 100mm. So macro lens is usually around that size, also double up as a nice portrait lens. You can get they're usually about f2.8 or, you know, so you can get that nice effect with portraits. Okay, so we're going to look at these a bit later on in conjunction with the lens, and I usually use, in most cases, I use Canon's cheapest lens, which is a 50mm prime, which is a lovely little lens. They call it the Nifty 50 quite often. It's really sharp. It's just over £100 now. I think when I bought mine not too long back, it was under £100 I managed to get it for, brand new. So you pick them up second hand, really cheap probably, and brand new, anything from 100, say £130, something like that. So for the price of these, so let's say £30, and a brand new 50mm lens, you may already have one. But it's better to use a prime, I will say that, than a zoom lens. So you're better off using a prime lens. It will get better sharpness with one of those. Okay, so I use the 50mm with that mainly. Let's put these down. Before I do, one of these I've got, it's on there, is made by Canon. And it cost an absolute fortune. I can't remember how much it cost me. That's astronomical. You know, it was about 200 and something pound, and I was very green at the time with macro photography and extension tubes especially. And I purchased one of those, and it works great. The Kenko one, got a whole set for £100, and you can get them cheaper than that. So don't buy the Canon ones. I really recommend that. Although they're good, they're okay, they don't do the job any better than the cheap ones. And I would say probably they're not really much better built than the Kenko. So don't waste your money on those. Okay. So that's the majority of lenses and extension tubes. So how else can we get close? Well, there are things. Just put these down. There are these attachments that you can put on the end of the lens that helps you get closer. Now, some macro photographers will actually poo-poo that and say, oh, they're no good. Well, that couldn't be more wrong. If you get the right make, and they aren't cheap, they are very high quality. They are called Raynox. Raynox, Raynox. So they are extremely good quality. And what this does is it duplicates, it doubles the focal length, and gets you really close. You can focus really close with this. It's like a magnifying glass. And you can get good results with those. And I've used, in some instances, I've used a macro lens, extension tubes, and with this on the end, and got some shots. However, at that range, the actual focal length that you've got, the actual depth of field, is very, very shallow. But if you do a thing called focus stacking, which we will talk about at a later stage, and you're taking lots of photos and gradually moving closer, you can stack those photos together to produce one image. And if you want to get really close, these will help you do that quite nicely. So those, I'm not sure of the price. They used to be quite cheap, and they've gone up and up. I think people have started buying them more now. And they've gone up and up in price. So they're not that cheap nowadays, but very good quality. Okay, so the next thing is light, because light is a big part of macro photography. Just as in any type of photography, light is the most important thing. The thing is with macro is, if you're doing normal butterfly shots and things like that, you can get by with just normal sunlight quite easily, and you can get lovely photographs. But when you start getting closer, the closer you get to something, you get less light. And that can simply be, from one case, because your body is causing a shadow over the object because you're having to get that close to it. So that can be one big way of losing light. And if the sun's coming in the opposite direction, you tend to get a lot of hard shadows if you've got enough light to get a good photo. So that causes a problem. So how do we get around that? And the answer to that is we use, or I use, not everybody, I use flash hell of a lot in my macro photography. And the main thing that I use is this. And this is called a ring light. Now there's lots of different types, right? And I'm going to really scare you now because the price of that is about 600 quid. There are some cheaper, but I wouldn't really go with anything too cheap, because this is actually a true flash. A lot of them have got LED lights, and they're okay if you're really close up, but this has got some distance to it, so you can get fantastic photographs with this. And the nice thing about it is, because it attaches to the end of the lens, when I'm there and I'm trying to get into bushes and trees and that, it's going with the lens, and I can get through a lot of branches and twigs and things like that, which is really nice, because you see a lot of contraptions made up by macro photographers. They've got sort of extension arms and all types of things, but the trouble is with those, they work nice, they work okay, and for some people they get fantastic results. But if you're working, you know, and you've got a tree here and bushes about, and you've got an insect that's in the bush, all this is catching and stopping you from getting the photo. So this is really nice for that. There are downsides to it. If you've got things like beetles with shiny shells and that, you get the light. If you look at these two lights here, you get like that imprinted on the shell of the, you know, you get these flashlights that bounce off reflective surfaces. So they're great for non-reflective creatures. I actually use them all the time because I've got a way around that with the skills I've got in editing, so I can edit it out and get by. So because it's so handy, I like to use it a lot. But it is very, very expensive, so that really is again an option if you're macro mad like I am. So not for everybody. Now there are other specific macro lenses. This is like a monster. So this has two flash heads. Look at that. So you can mimic it, put it on your head, you'll be an insect. You've got antennae. They are good because you can bend these heads in any position. You've also got a little light in the centre, and that's a continual light, and you can turn that up or down, and that helps you focus on objects in low light. So if it's really handy when you're working very, very close up and you've got a small aperture. It's almost total darkness. You're working in total darkness. You can't see what you're shooting. So you need a continual light to see what you're actually doing. So that's great. This thing is great for really close-up shots because of this facility. I'm not sure of the price of these now. I think they're around £250, and the make on it is Quangren Macro Twin Light KX800. Okay, so that's an option that you can use. But again, because of this way it's set up, if I'm trying to get into a bush with this, these are catching, and I hate that. So this gets used occasionally, but probably not as much as what it should do. So a cheaper option, but maybe not the best, because you could use just a normal flash if you've got an onboard flash, because you can use that as well. And that will be the cheapest way of taking a photograph with macro and using a flash so you can get the light that you need for a real close-up. The cheapest way of doing that is to use your 50mm lens, an extension tube, and this, or something similar. Piece of white paper. This is white foam, packing foam. Okay, and what you can do with this is, on your flash, your pop-up flash on your camera, you can hold it over the top and you can bend the end down like that, and it will bounce onto the subject. You can also put part of it, because this is translucent, in front of the actual light and then bend it, and what that will do is diffuse the light and cause it to cast around the insect in a quite natural way. So that system is quite good, and some people get wires and things to shape this and actually use elastic bands to attach it to with the camera, or bits of tape or whatever, and it does do a good job. So we'll be looking at that. So that will be the first technique that we actually go over when doing the macro shots. Okay, so that's a little introduction to macro and the different equipment that you can use. It goes much deeper than that. There's that many different techniques that you can use, that much, you know, you can make your own equipment. Probably macro photography is probably one of the most creative parts of photography from equipment wise, because people create all these weird looking things to get good lighting and everything. They help build their own flash systems and things like that. So it's experimental, and that's what I love about macro photography. It's very experimental. You can do all sorts of things. Something I haven't mentioned, and I will do at a later stage, is the use of LED torches and things like that, because they can be good as well. You can do great things with those. Probably not so much for the moving side of things, moving insects and things like that, but still life and slow moving insects and things like that. You can paint light with a torch. It's best to use a tripod in that case, but we'll be looking at that at a later stage. So for now, that's it. Look forward to the next video where we go a little bit deeper, and we'll start using the cheap version that we talked about with this very expensive piece of kit, and the 50mm macro lens and the extension tube.